Thanks for watching this video from the Bible Fulfilled. My name's Alex Polyak. I am the director of the Bible Fulfilled. And today I'm going to be talking about the infamous Mark of the Beast. Many Christians believe that the book of Revelation prophesies about a one world government led by the Antichrist who will require people, to get the mark of the beast on their right hand or on their forehead. It'll be a kind of a tattoo, or some say it'll be a microchip. So this one world government will require all people to get this mark. And without it, people will not be able to buy or sell anything. All commerce, buying and selling will be done electronically. And those without the mark of the beast will not be able to buy food or clothing or houses or gas or anything else. Eventually, those without the mark of the beast will be persecuted and, killed by this one world government. Okay, so here's the passage that this is based on. It's in Revelation 13, and it says, quote, "He causes all," and by the way, he here is the beast. So he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is a number of man. His number is 666. End quote. This is again from Revelation 13, verses 16 to 18. Okay, so many Christians believe that this passage is, referring to future time period when a one world government led by the Antichrist will require all people in the world to get this mark. And without it, people will not be able to engage in commerce of any kind. No buying and selling of anything. Okay, so is that what this passage is really teaching? The fact that I made this video probably tips you off to the fact that I don't believe it does. Okay, and here's why. First point, even if that's what this passage is about, it must have happened in the first century. After all, the angel of Revelation said, quote, "Do not seal up the words of this prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand." This is Revelation 22, verse 10. To seal up essentially means to set aside until later. And you can see this. This is clearly seen in Daniel 12, verses 4 and verse 9. So look that up if you're interested. That's what seal up means, to essentially, set it aside until later. So the angel of Revelation said, do not seal up this prophecy because it was about to happen. In fact, the angel said, do not seal up this prophecy, for the time is at hand. And at hand means about to happen. In fact, just a few verses earlier, in verse 6, the angel said, quote, "The time is short." So these are three time statements, back to back to back, all saying that the events of Revelation would be fulfilled soon. Now, by the way, Revelation was written in approximately the year AD 65. So all these events of Revelation must have been fulfilled, soon after that. For more information about the dating of Revelation, by the way, check out my article, The Dating of Revelation. I'll put a link to it in the video notes below if you're interested, okay? So whatever the mark of the beast refers to, it had to have happened in the first century per Revelation. That's point one. Okay, now point two. In order to understand what the mark of the beast refers to, we should first consider what John says, and John, the writer of Revelation, says about the opposite mark, God's mark. Here's what Revelation 14, verse 1 to 5 says about this. Quote, "Then I looked," and I here is John. Okay, so "Then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion," and this lamb is Jesus, by the way, "and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads." Again, this is the mark of God. "These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being firstfruits to God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God." End quote. And this is Revelation 14, verses 1 to 5. Okay, so notice that the 144,000 have the Father's name or God's mark written on their foreheads, and they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Again, this is Revelation 14, verse 1. So this is referring to Christians, right? Because they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. So these are Christians. Now, in another passage in Revelation about the 144,000, John, the writer of Revelation, says that the 144,000 are, quote, from the tribes of Israel. This is Revelation 7, verse 4. Therefore, the 144,000 with the name of God written on their foreheads refer to Jewish followers of Christ. That is, Jewish converts to Christianity. Furthermore, Revelation 14:4, which I just read, calls the 144,000 first fruits, which means they are the first generation of Jewish converts to Christianity. That's what first fruits means. The Apostle James was called a first fruit in James 1:18. 1 verse 18, I should say. The Apostle Paul was a first fruit. You can see this in Romans 8, verse 23. And the household of Achaia were first fruits. You can see this in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 15. So the first fruits refers to the first generation of Jewish converts to Christianity, such as the apostles. Therefore, the 144,000 with the mark of God were the first generation of Jewish converts to Christianity. This is the time period that Revelation is describing. In other words, it had to have happened in the first century, right? And as I just showed in the previous point, this is exactly the same fulfillment timing that the book of Revelation itself gives. As I just mentioned, the angel of Revelation said this prophecy would happen soon, for the time is near, or this prophecy would be fulfilled soon, for the time is near. This is from Revelation 22, verse 10. Okay, so notice also that Revelation 14, verse 5 says the 144,000 are without deceit. This is exactly how Jesus described his Jewish disciple Nathanael. Here's what he said, quote, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit." This is from John 1, verse 47. This too shows that the 144,000 without deceit refers to the first generation of Jewish converts to Christianity. In other words, they were the first, or they were Christians in the first century. That's what Revelation is about. Notice also how Revelation 14, verse 4 says the 144,000 were not defiled with women, for they were virgins, or for they are virgins. This is referring to the righteous remnant of Israel in the first century who stayed faithful to God and Jesus, as opposed to the majority of Israel in that day who went whoring after other gods, such as Caesar. And you can see this in John 19, verse 15. The Jewish leaders said that they have no God but Caesar. So they were whoring after other, gods. Jesus called his Jewish contemporaries, quote, an adulterous generation because they whored after other gods. You can read this in Matthew 12, verse 39, and you can read it also in Matthew 16, verse 4. On the other hand, the 144,000 with the mark of God were the faithful remnant of Israel, such as the apostles who stayed true to God by following Jesus. So these were the ones who are called virgins because they stayed true to God, instead of going after other gods. Here's something else to consider. As I just read, Revelation 14, verse 1 talks about the 144,000, and it says, the Father's name is written on their foreheads. Now, was this meant literally? No. And we can be sure of this because no other New Testament book mentions such a name or mark written on people's foreheads. If God was literally writing his name on the foreheads of Jewish converts to Christianity in the first century, then Jesus' apostles would have had one too. After all, they were part of the 144,000, as I just showed. And if this were the case, surely at least one of the other New Testament books besides Revelation would have mentioned this supernatural phenomenon, at least in passing, right? In fact, the scribes and Pharisees of that day likely would have called it demonic, just like when they accused Jesus of casting out evil spirits by the power of the devil or by the power of Beelzebub. And you can read this in Matthew 12, verse 23. So since the mark of God is not mentioned anywhere in the New Testament other than Revelation, we can safely conclude it was symbolic, not literal. And this should not be all that surprising, by the way, considering how symbolic the rest of the book of Revelation is. I mean, there's a seven-headed beast in Revelation 13:1. There's a lamb with 7 eyes in Revelation 5, verse 6. There's a woman clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet. This is Revelation 12, verse 1. There's an angel with a chain, so on and on. The Revelation is the most symbolic book in the New Testament. So given how symbolic Revelation is, we should not be surprised that the mark of God, or, written on their foreheads, is symbolic too. And another reason we can be sure that the mark of God was not meant literally is because of how it is used in Revelation 3. Jesus said in Revelation 3, quote, "He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and I will write on him my name." This is Revelation 3, verse 12. Now, to start with, was Jesus literally going to turn people into pillars of the temple, as the passage says? Of course not. Jesus meant this metaphorically or spiritually, just like when Peter said that Christians are living stones of the temple, right? In 1 Peter 2, verses 4 to 8. So Peter said Christians were living stones of the temple, and Jesus said he would turn people into pillars of the temple. Same concept. They both meant it metaphorically or, symbolically or spiritually. Furthermore, is Jesus really going to write all that stuff on people's foreheads? As I just read, Jesus said he would write the name of his Father, and he would write the name of the city of his God, the New Jerusalem, and he was going to write his own name on people's foreheads. So that's an awful lot of stuff to be writing on people's foreheads, right? I'm not sure there's enough room to write all that stuff. This is obviously meant symbolically or spiritually. So if the mark of God is symbolic, then we can safely conclude that the mark of the beast is symbolic too. These are opposite marks. One refers to those in the first century who followed God, and the other refers to those in the first century who aligned themselves with God's enemies, or Jesus's enemies, such as the Jewish establishment or the Roman Empire. Okay, so point 3. Here's something else to consider. Revelation is not the only book in the Bible that mentions a mark. Ezekiel does too. In Ezekiel's prophecy about the judgment of Israel back in the year 586 BC, and by the way, this was the previous time that Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed. This happened about 600 years before Jesus. So in Ezekiel's prophecy about the judgment of Israel, God had told an angel to, quote, "put a mark on the foreheads of the men," and he's talking about the faithful men, "who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done in Israel." And this is from Ezekiel 9, verse 4. And after telling the angel to put a mark on the faithful Israelites, God then tells the angel to kill anybody without the mark. And you can read this in Ezekiel 9, verse 5. Okay, so was this a physical mark that could be seen with physical eyes? I think not. In fact, Ezekiel calls this a vision in Ezekiel 8, verse 4. So this mark was not something that people can see with their eyes. However, the judgment aspect certainly was seen. In fact, this judgment happened just a few years later in 586 BC when God used the Babylonians to completely destroy Israel and the first temple. This is when Solomon's temple was destroyed. And the city of Jerusalem was also destroyed. Many Jews were killed and taken into slavery back then. So the reason why Revelation used this exact same imagery, the angel and the mark, was because a similar kind of judgment was about to happen to Israel again. Israel had once again become full of abominations, just like in Ezekiel's day. And God was once again going to judge them, just like he had back in the year 586 BC. And he did just a few years later in the year 8070. Just like in the previous judgment, the city of Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed. And even the first century historian Josephus said 1.1 million Jews were killed, another 97 were taken into slavery. So this event happened in the first century, just like Revelation prophesied. Okay, so point 4. Notice that Revelation says people would receive the mark of the beast on their hands and foreheads. And this is Revelation 13, verse 16. So many commentators have pointed out that the mark on the forehead symbolizes one's thoughts, and the mark on the hand symbolizes one's actions. Moreover, a person's thoughts and actions reveal who he belongs to. So having the mark of the beast in the first century meant you stood with God's enemies, the Jewish establishment and or the Roman Empire. And conversely, having the mark of God or God's name written on your forehead meant that you stood with God and his Christ. This is what the mark of the beast refers to. It's not some tattoo or microchip. That's the stuff of end times fiction, not the Bible. Okay, so now what about the term buying and selling? What does this refer to? Let me read the passage again just so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Again, this is Revelation 13, verses 16 to 17. It says, quote, "He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of man. His number is 666. Again, this is Revelation 13, verse 16 through 17. Okay, so what does the term buying and selling refer to? Some commentators say buying and selling was specifically linked to the temple in Jesus' day, which was destroyed in AD 70. If you remember back in Matthew 21, verse 12, Jesus overturned the money changers, the tables in the temple, because they were buying and selling. Actually, they were ripping people off in the temple. So that's why Jesus overturned the temples, or the tables. These money changers were, extorting people, basically. In fact, Jesus called the temple a den of thieves in Matthew 21, verse 12. Elsewhere, Jesus referred to the Jewish leaders who controlled the access to the temple as hypocrites. And you can read this in Matthew 23, verse 13. He also called them full of extortion in Matthew 23, verse 25. And he called them broods of vipers in Matthew 23, verse 33. The Christians in that day were sometimes even kicked out of the temple and thus not allowed to buy and sell. In fact, the book of Acts records an incident in which Paul was dragged out of the temple and the doors were slammed shut behind him. You can read about this in Acts 21, verses 26 to 30. So this is one possibility of what the term buying and selling, not allowed to buy or sell, refers to. They were not allowed to buy and sell in the temple because the Jews of that day would not, they'd kick them out and they wouldn't allow it. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that it simply refers to one's allegiance, similar to one's mark. Remember how I said the mark represents whose side you were on? Having the mark of the beast meant you were aligned with Jesus' enemies, and having the mark of God meant you were aligned with God and with Jesus. It's the same with buying and selling. Buying refers to one's allegiance. It has to do with buying or choosing Christ as opposed to buying or choosing worldly pleasures. In fact, a few chapters earlier in Revelation, Jesus told Christians to, quote, "Buy from me gold refined in the fire that you may be rich, and white garments that you may be clothed, that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed, and anoint your eyes with eye salve that you may see." And this is from Revelation 3, verse 18. There's also a similar passage in the Old Testament where God says, quote, "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy?" This is from Isaiah 55, verses 1 to 2. So buying has to do with choosing the things of God over the things of the world. As Jesus said, quote, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This is Matthew 6, verses 19 through 20. So these are a couple of possibilities, possible ways to interpret buying and selling. Keep in mind, though, however you interpret it, the events of Revelation must have happened, in the first century, because that's what the book itself says. Okay? All right, so what about the term 666? One last thing I want to talk about is the term 666. What does this refer to? Okay, first, notice that John, the writer of Revelation, said to calculate the number of the beast, which implies that his first century audience could have calculated or could have figured out the beast's identity, which means the beast had to have been alive at that day. Remember, John wrote Revelation to 7 churches. You can read this in chapter 1. And then here in verse 13, John tells them to calculate the number of the beast, which implies that they could have, right? So they must have been able to figure out who this beast is by calculating the number. So the beast must have been alive in that day. John certainly would not have expected these churches to identify a beast, thousands of years later in the future. Secondly, calculating people's names with numbers such as 666 was a common practice in John's day, when Revelation was written. The Hebrews and Greeks in the first century used a numbering system called gematria, or gematria, however you want to pronounce it, which is essentially, it's similar to the Roman numeral system you are probably familiar with, such as on grandfather clocks where you see the Roman numerals. Well, the Hebrews and the Greeks had a similar system called gematria. And what's interesting is then when we use gematria to calculate Nero's name, we get 666. So that's who 666 refers to, the Roman Empire Nero. He was the emperor when Revelation was written. By the way, the reason Nero was called a beast is because he was an evil, degenerate person. Nero tried to poison his own mother, and after that failed, he had his centurions bludgeon and slash her to death. Nero also had his wife, Octavia, killed so that he could marry his mistress, whom he later kicked to death when she complained about him coming home late. Nero also castrated a boy named Sporus and tried to make a woman out of him, whom he married and treated as his wife. Nero also dressed people up in animal skins, tied them to stakes, dressed them up in animal skins, and he attacked their genitals with his mouth. So Nero was truly a degenerate beast. Historians also say that Nero started the Great Fire in Rome in the year AD 64 because he wanted to rebuild Rome. And then he blamed it on Christians. Then he persecuted these Christians mercilessly because they denied doing it and instead probably blamed him for it. He would tie Christians to light poles in his courtyard, dump tar on them, and light them ablaze for his nightly amusement. This is where the term Roman candle comes from. So Nero was a beast in every sense of the word. Now, you may be wondering, if Nero is the 666 beast, why didn't John, the writer of Revelation, simply say so? Why did John have to use gematria, the code 666? And the answer is that he was trying to prevent further persecution of Christians. The Romans did not understand gematria, but the Hebrews and Christians did. So John did not want the Roman authorities to know that he was writing about Nero, in Revelation, calling him a beast and stuff like that, because it would have made the persecution all the worse for his brothers and sisters in Christ. So he used the code, 666, which the Christians understood, but the Romans did not. So the 666 beast was Nero. Now, keep in mind, there were other beasts mentioned in Revelation 2. There's a land beast and a sea beast. but these are beyond the scope of this video. But I do discuss them in detail in my book, The End is Here, How the New Testament's Prophecies Were Fulfilled. In fact, I get into much more detail about the 666 beast also. And in fact, I get into detail about the book of Revelation too. So my book should be available, by the way, in a few weeks. Actually, if you've been watching my videos, you know that I plan to have my book released by summer, but that's now come and gone, unfortunately. I ran into all kinds of editorial and publishing problems. I apologize for that. Anyway, I think I got all that figured out, so my book should be available in a few weeks, hopefully. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested. So anyway, that is it for today. Thanks for watching this video. I know you could be watching thousands of other videos, and heck, millions of other videos, but you took the time to watch this one, so I truly thank you. I appreciate that. Also, if you like this video, please do me a favor and hit the like button. I'm told that it helps the Google algorithm and makes the video easier for others to find on YouTube. So if you could, please hit the like button if you liked it. Also, if you want to be notified of new videos, hit the subscribe button, okay? All right, so that is it for today. Have a great day. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next week.